This park in New York City has more than 20,000 dead bodies hidden underneath. This is Washington Square Park. And back in 2009, just a few short days before Halloween, the electrical company was doing some work in the infrastructure. And then they come across something very hard. They found out that it was bones and bones and bones. 20,000 people buried underneath. And that's because it became a potter's field back in the 1700s. And then in the 1800s, New York City had a huge yellow fever epidemic. Many people died. They decided to bury them just outside the city limits. So before this became a potter's field, it was actually Little Africa. The reason for that is a lot of the freed African slaves from Dutch times settled over here. But the city evicted them, kicked them off their land, and made it into a graveyard. Stay curious, my friends.
The discovery of thousands of African American remains beneath Washington Square Park in New York City highlights the long and painful history of African Americans in the U.S. This amazing discovery is a reminder of the oppression, suffering and injustice that African Americans have endured throughout American history. Prior to the discovery, scholars had assumed that the area was mostly populated by Europeans due to its proximity to major colonial settlements and ports. However, the archaeological investigation has revealed evidence of African American burials dating back to the 18th century. Despite the fact that roughly 15,000 African Americans lived in Manhattan during the 1700s, it had previously been assumed that none were buried in the area. The sheer number of African American remains found at Washington Square Park suggests that the park was a bustling center for the African American community in the city. It is possible that the enslaved and free African Americans who were buried in the park worked at nearby businesses and ports, and even helped to build colonial settlements. It is also possible that many were buried there with no pomp and circumstance after having died from diseases, poverty and other conditions. The archaeological investigation at Washington Square Park demonstrates how the physical layout of cities can conceal stories and histories of minority groups, particularly those of African Americans. This discovery also serves as a reminder of the need to investigate, research, and publicize the full stories of African American life and history in the U.S. Ultimately, the archaeological investigation at Washington Square Park is a reminder of the oppressive and unjust history of African Americans in the U.S. It also serves to preserve the story of their hard work and determination amidst deplorable conditions and ongoing experiences of discrimination. It is essential that we remember these stories and honor the lives that have been lost, so that we can continue to fight for justice in the present and the future.